Would a child of God actually stand up and tell him no? Probably not, at least not intentionally. But what if we're doing that without even realizing it? In today's video, I'll share one unexpected comment made to me that changed the way that I think about obedience to God. Then we'll talk about ways that we do tell God no by our own limiting mindset. And finally, we'll learn deliberate ways to avoid spiritually defeating fear and explore how we can shift our mindset to joyful obedience. Hi, this is Gina. Welcome to Hope and Cope. This channel is for Christians that want to learn to walk victoriously in this turbulent world. Stick with me to the end because I've saved a powerful truth that will encourage you and inspire you to say yes to God. So a story that happened a long time ago to me, but it changed the way I think about telling God no, is I used to be involved in prison ministry in women's time. And I was invited by a gentleman that was on a team going into the men's prison. I was invited by him to be on the team going into the men's prison. And I just flatly said, no, I don't go into the men's prison. And so another gentleman that was on that team that goes to our church said, hey, can I give you a little advice? Sure. And he said, try not to just tell God what you will and won't do. So of course, this hit me very profoundly. Don't tell God what you will and won't do. And so I went to that director and I said, hey, let me pray about it. And I prayed about it and I spoke to my husband about it. And then we ended up going on that prison ministry. And after that, I went on multiple more trips into the men's prison, and it just wasn't the big deal that I was afraid it was going to be. But I had just said no because I thought that I was supposed to say no. And so when somebody said, don't tell God what you will and won't do, I have tried throughout the years to not determine what I will and won't do for God or for my faith walk. If you're finding this content helpful, please like, subscribe, and share with someone else who could benefit from it. Sometimes because of our own limitations, we say no to God. It doesn't feel like no to us because we're just sure that we are completely incapable of obedience. We simply know that we can't do that thing. We don't have the time, the talent, the resources, the knowledge. We can't. We're not saying no. We're saying, Lord, it's impossible. Absolutely impossible. But then that reminds me of the story of Moses. If you guys have ever heard the story of Moses in the Old Testament, where God is calling him to go speak to Pharaoh about releasing the children of Israel from their bondage, and he just was adamant that he was not the person for the job. But of course he did end up going with his brother Aaron. And so just try to realize, as inadequate as we feel like we are, if God's asking you to do something, then just be open to the idea that you can do it. Typically the enemy can never get us to just say no to God. But he can easily get us to tell God, I can't, Lord. I think that is our own short-sightedness because we believe we can't. We think that that's the truth. Without even realizing it, we sometimes are just flat out telling God no. Not with our words necessarily, but with our actions and our attitudes and our excuses. But what if we let God lead and we follow by faith? What if we stop worrying about how this affects me, how this is going to look on me, what kind of results is this going to get for me, and we leave the outcomes to God, and we just focus on obedience, and we try not to worry about how it reflects upon us? What if we let go of our fear and we step out in faith and trust God to handle all the details, to handle the outcomes? saying yes to God, after all, is simply a matter of obedience and trust. And the Bible tells us that without faith, we can't please God. We can't have all the answers and truly please God. We've got to step out in faith. And I know that as human beings, we have our comfort zone, but God is honestly just not too worried about our self-imposed zones. He's not. He wants us to walk by faith and not by sight. He wants us to be empowered by the Holy Spirit to fulfill His purposes for our lives. When we choose to lose our life so that we may find it again, we may never fully see the ripple effect on this side of heaven. But let's always be prepared to say yes to God and let Him work out the details. If we only have one agenda, and that is to do the will of God, then we find it easier to detach from the results. The results are not really up to me anyway. They're God's results. Paul tells us in one of his epistles that one person plants a seed, one person comes by and waters, but it's really God that makes that plant grow. It's really God that gives the increase, causes that fruitful plant to grow and bear additional fruit. So this reminds me of the parable of the talents. Well, we know that this rich man was going away on a trip, and he gives money to his servants to use to earn more money and to report back when he gets back. Well, 2 in the story did, and they earned money, and he said, well done, good and faithful servant. But this one just took the money and hid it, he buried it, and then when the master came back, he just simply returned to him what was his. And he was like, if you had even at minimum put it in the bank, it would have at least drawn interest. And so he didn't even try. God gave him a talent. This person in the parable gave him a talent, gave him something to do, and he wouldn't even try. And so the curious thing about this story is he says to his servants, take the one talent that he even has and give it to the one that has 10. So what I'm trying to say is a warning to us is if we won't try to do what God asks us to do, if we won't try to be outside our comfort zone and be obedient to the things that God puts in our lives to do, then what little ability and talent and resources we have very well could be removed. So I think what the principle is we just get more and more hard-hearted. We are just willing to do less and less for God. We're willing to try less and less. And so our influence and our ability to be obedient just continues to shrink and shrink and shrink till we have nothing anymore to give because we're so self-defeated. My final point is that God's goals for us go beyond what we can conceive of in our own lives. Our obedience could affect generations to come. And our limiting views can also affect our children and our grandchildren. What if my obedience breaks a chain or destroys a stronghold in the lives of my children and grandchildren? Would that make it worth it? I say emphatically yes. And if you'd like to hear more about my personal journey of laying my life down, I've created a playlist and you can check it out at the end of this video. But I want you to know that if I get victory over something in my life, then I'm setting an example for my children and my grandchildren. If my children and my grandchildren hear me using victorious speech in my walk with God, then they will see my example, and then hopefully that will enable them to have that same courage, that same boldness, that same confidence that if they are obedient, they can leave the details, they can leave the results to God. I hope this was helpful. If it was, please remember to like and share and subscribe and check out the description box. I always have a Bible verse and a song in there for you. And until next time, remember I'm praying for you. I love you. God bless.